So welcome you all to Brain and Mind, this last event of the academic year. Now, I'd say a particular welcome to A-level students, but because yesterday was a bank holiday, we have a feeling there won't be, and I don't think do I see any? There aren't any A-level students in the audience, okay, which is, again, very unusual. I think it's the first time that we haven't had A-level students here. Okay, and also, there may be some people here who are not particularly interested in philosophy or neuroscience or psychology, but are really interested in sport. So if that's one of you, then welcome, and I hope you enjoy the event. Now, this particular evening marks the end of 11 years of running this Brain and Mind series, 3 a year, 1 a term. And over the years, we've covered such topics as music in the brain, art in the brain, emotions, perception, belief, pain, addiction, criminality, sound, touch, taste, and the brain. That's just to mention a few. And many of you will know, or at least some of you might be loyal attenders of these talks. So you'll know that the point of them is to tell us about the perspective of each of the 3 disciplines, neuroscience, psychology, and philosophy, on a particular topic that we've chosen for discussion. Now, we don't ask the speakers to confer, but rather we choose specialists in each of the 3 disciplines, and we ask them to tell us how their particular discipline studies this particular topic. And what I hope our audience will take away from this is that there are many different ways to understand a particular phenomenon. For some of our topics, it may be thought that the obvious way to study it is to study neuroscience. For others, it may be thought that the obvious way is through psychology. More and more, we're getting used to the fact that neuroscience and psychology work together. What may be less obvious, at least to some, is where philosophy fits in. But trust me, it does. Indeed, there's been so much interdisciplinary work between neuroscience, philosophy, and psychology over the decades that this is really not an unusual thing to bring these 3 disciplines together. Each discipline has much to learn from the others, as I hope will become apparent again this evening. Now, you'll notice that one of our big screens, you can see over in the corner there, is we have a second audience, and that audience joins us from the medical school in Hamburg. Indeed, one of the co-founders of this series, along with myself, is Professor Micah Glitch, who teaches at the medical school Hamburg. Professor Glitch was for many years a fellow of St. Hilda's College before moving to Hamburg. It's wonderful we're able to carry on working together to put together this event. And we like to think of it, as well as being interdisciplinary, as also being international, or at least Anglo-European. In the spring, I usually host the event from Hamburg, but this year I was unable to do so. And I'm sorry for this, Hamburg, and hope that maybe next year I'll be able to be with you. During the Q&A, I'll be taking questions both from this audience and from the audience in Hamburg. Now, as well as collaborating, the medical school helps with some of the funding for the event, along with St. Hilda's College. And while we're grateful for the support of both institutions, funds are rather limited. What's new? In order to be able from time to time to bring in speakers from outside Oxford, we've started at each event to ask our audience if they might make a modest contribution. The odd 10 or 20 pounds goes a long way for us, and I encourage you to make a donation, which you can do either when you go to book your ticket or on the back of your program. Now, I'll also quickly introduce members of the executive committee who put this event together. There's the aforementioned Professor Glitch, who covers the neuro side of things. There's Dr. Anne Dowker. She's our lecturer in psychology here at St. Hilda's, and she helps with the psychology side. And there's our student representative, Georgina Summers, who happens to be a psychologist. And there's myself. I'm an emeritus fellow in philosophy here at St. Hilda's. One last thing. On the back of your program, we've mentioned the topic for next year, which is consciousness and the brain. While we don't yet have the dates for these events, we'll post them on Eventbrite and on the college website just as soon as we can. and certainly by the start of the summer, so you can make plans for next year. They're always the second or third, if it means anything to you, the second or third week, Monday or Tuesday of each term. And just to tantalize you a little, we'll be covering animal consciousness in the brain, self-consciousness in the brain, human consciousness in the brain and the brain. Tonight, we're looking at movement, sport, and the brain. While psychologists, neuroscientists, and philosophers are all interested in the study of movement, in the case of sport, we engage in a particular kind of what might be called skilled activity. This kind of activity raises interesting questions, some of which we'll touch on this evening. We're going to move straight on to the psychology speaker, or I should say speakers, because we have two speakers tonight. One is Lucy Bowles, Professor Lucy Bowles, accompanied by Megan Groombridge. Professor Bowles is Professor of Developmental Psychopathology in the Department of Experimental Psychology here in Oxford, and a Fellow of Magdalen College. Megan is a DPhil student working on sports injury. Their topic this evening is the relationship between sport injury and mental health. And over to you both. After this talk, I'll take Q&A, some questions, both in Hamburg and in Oxford.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be here today. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah, can everybody here in Hamburg? We'll assume they can.
we hope they can. Thank you very much.
Into the microphone.
Will do. So Megan and I will be talking to you today about our research that's funded by the Podium Institute here at Oxford, which is a research institute focused on the impact of sports injury. And our focus is on mind, body, and the game. So we're thinking about the role of sport in mental health and well-being of young people, with a focus also on when young athletes get hurt. We should start by saying that we know, of course, that sport can be beneficial. In fact, there are myriad benefits, and I'm going to pass over to Megan to talk through those.
So, as we know, sport has multiple benefits for young people. So we've got some on the screen. It can help for motor skill development, cognitive performance, facilitating supportive relationships with both peers but also adults, for example, coaches. It can also enhance pro-social behaviour and help with emotional regulation, and has a range of benefits across both mental and physical health. So sport really is a powerful concept and context to facilitate these positive developmental outcomes. However, crucially, these positive outcomes really rely on children's motivation to actually engage in sport and sustain participation. However, unfortunately, we do see dropout during adolescence. So this study here looked at youth sport participation trends across Europe at about 5.5 million young people, and found that sport participation rates tend to peak at about 10 to 14 years old, and then sharply declines later into adolescence. And if we zoom in on females in particular, they have significantly lower sport participation rates across the board and have a more severe decline. So if we look at this table here, so we've got some sports listed down the column, and then we've got some age groups across the top. And as you can see, in the younger age groups, the green arrow shows that there's increase in participation across a variety of sports. But then as we go into older adolescents with the red arrow, you can see that there's a real decline in participation. And this is actually found in 94% of the sports that they looked at. So overall, this is quite a concerning picture of disengagement in later adolescence. But this disengagement is also quite a complex picture, and it's impacted by lots of different factors. So, for example, kids might go from sampling lots of different sports when they're younger to specialising in a few, or they might go from competitive sports to more recreational sports. And for both of these things, it could therefore look like sport participation is decreasing. If we also consider adolescence as a period of substantial change, these kids might have increasing demands. So, for example, school and exam and work, or they might have competing demands with keeping up with friendships and their school and their sport, which could also impact participation rates. And finally, adolescence is a period of enhanced sport injury risk, which Lucy will touch on in a bit, and also poor mental health rates, which might impact their perceived competence or ability in their sport, their enjoyment, their stress levels, their motivation in the sport. So, to really understand this sport dropout, we thought a good step would be to understand why do kids actually initiate sport in the first place? So what is their motivation? So if you look at this spectrum here, this is self-determination theory, which conceptualizes motivation along a spectrum. So on one side, we have amotivation, which is the lack of drive or desire to engage in an activity. And then if we move across, we have extrinsic motivation, which is where an individual might do an activity due to external rewards or pressure. And then the other end, we have intrinsic motivation, where someone might engage due to the inherent satisfaction or pleasure or interest they have in that activity. So that's really what we want to foster in these children. So how do we do this? This can be influenced by lots of different factors. What's key in the literature is these so-called basic psychological needs. So the idea that children need to feel autonomy and choice, they need to feel competent and they have an ability in what they're doing, and they need to feel relatedness or belongingness with others. But we can understand that actually in the grand scheme of things, as well as these, there's probably lots of other factors that I've listed up here that might impact their motivation. So to explore this, we've conducted a review to try and understand youth sport participation from a developmental perspective. So for those of you who are unfamiliar, a review is a scientific method where we comprehensively do a big search of the literature, but this is constrained by specific criteria depending on our research question. So as you can see in the bottom left, we looked at studies conducted in the last 10 years in team sports, with children under 16 years old, and obviously we had a measure of motivation in there somewhere. And this methodology is very transparent and reproducible. And I conducted a narrative review, which is where we extracted our 53 studies in this field, and then we looked for the key themes and we really synthesized them. And overall, we found that motivation is impacted by a range of factors. So, for example, if we zoom in on parents, we found that parental support might increase motivation, which could lead to more sport engagement or enjoyment, whereas parental withdrawal might decrease motivation and lead to sport burnout or dropout. And the important thing about these findings as well is we saw that these outcomes were also influenced by features of the sport themselves, so maybe the competitive level, but also demographic features such as sex or age. So to summarize this section, we found that social influences such as parents, peers, and coach behavior largely shape sport participation outcomes, but also the type of motivation that the child has to do that sport will also influence these outcomes. And finally, individual differences in psychological attributes, so mental health, their feelings of self-worth or competence, might also additionally impact these outcomes. But there are some gaps in the literature, and just one key one that I want to point out is that there is a real lack of consideration for age or sex-related differences. This has been really neglected in the literature that I looked at. And I think that this is really important because changes in the sport environment and competitiveness during development, differences in social demands, changes due to puberty, likely all impacts sport engagement or disengagement trends.
Thank you. So once young people are involved in sport, there's another consideration that we might want to think about, and that is the unfortunate reality of sports injuries. And whilst most young people engage in sports do not get injured, it's still the case that young athletes actually carry the highest injury risk. In fact, one study found that for every 100,000 participants in sports, we see around 6.25 injuries, which is by far the highest amount out of any age group when we're focusing on this adolescent period. And adolescence is a particularly important time in development for lots of reasons, not just physical. We also know that during this age period, we start to see impacts and changes in young people's mental health and well-being, which is the greater part of my research to date. For example, we know that 75% of lifetime mental health disorders actually begin before the age of 24. Megan talked about some of the changes that are occurring during adolescence that might be impacting young people's mental health. But we were interested in whether there is any role of sports, and in particular, sports injury, on declines in mental health in this age group. We also had a look at the existing literature, and we didn't find any systematic reviews that were going through the evidence, despite a number of studies looking at the relationship between sports injury and mental health. No one had pulled this together so that we could start to quantify this relationship. To what extent might injury impact on mental health in young people? But we also wanted to know if the opposite was true. We know that young people may be struggling with their mental health and well-being, and what does that do to their risk of injury when they go on the pitch or when they engage in sports? And can we identify any mechanisms for any interrelationships? So for this study, we conducted what's known as a systematic review and meta-analysis. What this is doing, again, is a transparent search of the literature using keywords across different data sets, where we extract data and then we extract effect sizes, so that we can pull them together across different studies and start to quantify the strength of any relationships that we observed. In doing so, we screened over 13,000 different studies, of which 84 met our inclusion criteria. So that was around young people aged between 10 and 24 years of age, including terms related to sports injury, and a wide range of terms related to mental health and well-being. The pooled data was from over 220,000 young people across 13 different countries. We were really interested to try to make this as globally representative as possible. Our review was inclusive, which meant we had a very broad range of sports injuries. We also had a very broad range of sports. There was a big debate in the team about what counted as sport and what other activities, all the way through as chess a sport, all the way up, including grassroots activities, local football teams, to really elite sporting competitions. And we took a very broad, all-encompassing approach to this. In terms of mental health, we were prioritising well-validated measures, but again, we included a broad range of psychological disorders, from depression and anxiety, but also related constructs such as stress, suicidal ideation, and so on. And beyond sort of psychological disorders, we also wanted to look at well-being, because we know that that was measured in lots of these studies, and of course is really important when we think about how young people are doing psychologically when they engage in sports. And so to that end, we extracted studies that included measures of quality of life, life satisfaction, and happiness. So once we'd extracted all this data, we then performed our meta-analyses. So in this study, we are looking at the relationship between one particular type of sports injury that most of our studies actually focused on, and that is concussion. So here we're looking at concussion incidence, so whether or not concussion has occurred, as a predictor of later mental health and well-being as the outcome. And what you can see here, to read a forest plot, you have the studies that we've included listed here and the total number of participants in the study. And then we're looking at this diamond in the correlation. And if it's, in this case, if it's positive, it means there's a positive relationship between concussion incidence and later mental health. As you can see, it's not crossing 0, which means that we do find evidence of a significant relationship. At about 0.2, this is a small effect, but this is pulled from a large number of studies. We separated concussion from other injuries because concussion, of course, is affecting the brain. And if you look at some of the symptoms of concussion, they can also include things like depression or low mood and fatigue, which overlaps with our outcome. So we considered these separately. Also, when we were extracting mechanisms, we thought that these should be considered as a separate grouping. So what about other sports-related or musculoskeletal injuries? Once again, if we look at our forest plot, we can see that we found evidence of a significant relationship between different sports injuries and mental health. Oops, actually, I've missed a finding. That was very similar to this. In fact, when we look at musculoskeletal injuries and later mental health, we find a slightly stronger effect. It hovers around 0.3. Again, it's small, but overall findings of significance. What about the reverse? So if injuries lead to mental health, that perhaps is expected, do we find collective evidence that if a young person is already struggling with their mental health, might that lead to an increased risk of injury when they go on the sports field? And in fact, we did find evidence that this may be the case. Now, this is pooling a lot of studies together, and the impact is on sports injury incidence as an outcome. So this is whether or not a young person gets injured. We did also examine other outcomes, so not just incidence of injury, but whether, for example, if a young person is already struggling with their mental health, does that have any impact on their recovery when they get injured on the sports field? And once again, we found some evidence that this may be the case. So when we think about our findings collectively, what we're really seeing is a reciprocal relationship between young people's mental health and their risk of injury. So if a young person walks onto the field with poor mental health, they're 1.5 times more likely to be injured than their peers who may be doing well. If they do get injured, of course, that may have an impact on worsening of mental health symptoms, and that's whether or not we're talking about musculoskeletal injuries or concussion. So what we're seeing here is a potentially vicious cycle. So we might ask ourselves, well, what explains this relationship? What are the studies saying about potential mechanisms? And what we could find from the studies that we screened was sort of 4 key areas of relationship, several of which were about the individual. So we found factors relating to athletic identity. So if a young person really identifies as someone who's involved and active in sport, then an injury may threaten their identity, their sense of self. And we found that those young athletes who have a stronger athletic identity were more likely not just to get injured, but also to experience recurrent injuries over time. When looking specifically at concussion, they were also less likely to recover quickly. So they recovered more slowly if they held a stronger sense of athletic identity. Another sort of individual level factor that seemed to be related to injury was performance anxiety. And that's so young people who had high anxiety related to sport, or also indeed high trait anxiety, so just general levels of anxiety, were more likely to experience injuries overall, so they had a greater injury risk. Young people with high trait anxiety were also more likely to fear becoming injured again, and that might have implications for their subsequent re-engagement with sport. Those young people who'd experienced just greater life event stress in general, so who reported greater numbers of daily hassles, stress from multiple different areas of their life, experienced prolonged recovery, particularly for things like concussion. And finally, in terms of individual factors, young people's personality styles seem to have an important role here. So we found a buffering effect of personality styles related to sort of optimism or hardiness, and young people with greater self-esteem were also somewhat protected from the impact of stress on injury time loss away from the field. And we found studies that reported that young people with greater levels of hope had better rehabilitation beliefs. It wasn't all about individual factors, however, and we found a really important role of social support. So we know that young people who have stronger social support, and that could be from their peers, their teammates, but also from coaches or from relationships with their family, were less likely to experience depression when they had been injured. But we also identified studies that indicated that some people felt more isolated as a consequence of being injured. They're away from the game, they're away from their support structures, their routines, and this may also make injury and recovery more difficult. So when we were thinking about our study findings, we felt that if we are focusing only on sports injury in terms of the body and not the mind, then we're actually missing half of the picture. In terms of our findings and the impacts for clubs or coaches or clinicians, we felt that we might want to consider measuring mental health alongside physical health across the whole season. So not just in return to play, when of course there may be a bias in reporting how young people are doing, and not just post-injury. So many of the studies that we found only measured mental health once a young person had been injured. So they were unable to look at the direction of effects. Really, our study calls for more repeated measures of mental health throughout a season. I think our findings also call for the need for mental health awareness in sports teams, and that could include employing counsellors or staff to work with young people in sports teams, and particularly those who are experienced in professionals who understand athletic culture and the competitive identity. Thinking now more in terms of elite sport, it may be important to consider return to play, both in terms of physical readiness, but also psychological readiness. And we might want to think about how we can build support and coping skills for young people when they're away from the pitch, not just strength when they're on it. In terms of the actual research that we looked at, so those were some sort of takeaways for clubs, coaches and clinicians, but what did we learn as researchers? Well, the quality of the evidence was really mixed. What we found was that many studies did not pre-register, so only 3 out of 84 studies were pre-registered. What does that mean? I don't know if people are aware of pre-registration, but we've become increasingly focused on this in psychology. It means ideally research should set out a priori, before you collect the data, what you want to study, what your key hypotheses are, and how you're going to study it. And that means that when we report our findings, we're really transparent and we report what findings we found, what was significant, but also what findings we didn't find. If studies don't pre-register, we're never really clear what else they may have tested, and we're probably inflating error or including more studies with error. We also feel that we need more standardized mental health measures and injury measures. There was such a range of measures in our study. We did search for a wide range to include that, but it makes it really tricky to synthesize findings when everyone's measuring mental health in a different way, as well as injury risk in a different way. We only found one longitudinal study in the UK specifically. Most of the studies were from North America, and we didn't find any longitudinal studies from low and middle-income middle-income countries, despite the fact that that's where most of the young people in the world live. So there's a desperate need for our research to become more diverse and more inclusive so that we can understand this relationship from a more global perspective. And finally, we think that there's an important role here to co-produce research with young athletes so that we can better understand their lived reality. Their daily lives should shape the research questions that we're looking at and not just the answers that we might find.
So to kind of bring together both of our findings, we found that sport is beneficial. So it has a large array of psychosocial benefits during adolescence. However, as I mentioned before, we do see this drop out. So we really need to better understand specific behaviours or environmental features in sport that influence sustained participation versus disengagement during this period. And as we've both mentioned, adolescence is a period of vulnerability for heightened injury risk, but also poor mental health. But this consideration does seem to be lacking from the literature. And as we've seen, we saw that there's a reciprocal relationship whereby poor mental health increases injury risk and being injured can worsen mental health. But at the moment, currently, these considerations are lacking and need to be implemented into future research.
And I think a final perspective on our 2 collective studies is that this relationship might seem simple, but it's actually quite a complex one. And we shouldn't be surprised. This is a really complex time. It's a period of substantial change across the life course. And this is bound to have an influence both in terms of sports participation and also the mental health and well-being of our young people. We found that we need to better support our young people. So both studies identified an important role for social support and that can be from many levels, both as parents or as peers, but also from coaches and other people involved in sports. In terms of research gaps, we need better studies. We need longitudinal research to really understand sports participation over time, to really understand this dropout and what's going on during later puberty, and also what's happening in terms of young people's mental health and how that influences their sports participation and injury risk. We need to really embed our research in a developmental perspective. And finally, we need to work together. We need to work together to support our young people, to encourage them to play sport. We know it has hugely beneficial effects, but also to protect them. So if they do get injured, that they can recover and recover well, and that they don't experience poor mental health. Thank you so much for everyone for listening, and also to the Podium Institute for supporting our research. Thank you.
Right, so this is the time when we can have about 10, 12 minutes for questions from both from Hamburg and from Oxford. If you two, you each have a mic there. Yeah, great. Okay, I'm going to start in Hamburg and ask Micah, do you have any questions that you'd like to start us off with?
I'm going to ask the audience first. Any questions? Yes.
In the studies, did you control for the level of sports, so whether it was professional or whether it was more like just for fun? Yeah.
Yes. Can you hear me on this okay? Is that? So in my review, we just focused on grassroots team sports. So by that, we meant it was non-selective and recreational participation. So that was our control. So any studies that came up with sport as elite or maybe just play, we excluded and just used a grassroots context as our control.
For our study, we actually... Is this on? Oh, I think so. And for our study, we were quite inclusive definition of sports. So we included grassroots, but also elite sports. In terms of our meta-analyses, we pulled the data because unfortunately we didn't have enough studies in order to really separate out more elite level sports from grassroots sports. But in the sort of the narrative part of our review, when we were talking about mechanisms identified, we did discuss these separately because, of course, there might be different impacts in terms of young people's mental health depending on how much sport that they're engaging with.
We can have questions on both of the talks that we've heard, so feel free. Yes? Could you just, Georgina, just, yeah. We'll have a microphone so you can be heard in Hamburg.
Yeah, I would have a question regarding this.
Yeah, we're going to take one from Oxford and then I'll come back to Hamburg, okay?
Can you hear me? So this is a question for Astrid, and the question is, in the study or studies, because I don't remember at the moment, where you compared individuals who had been brought up shod or barefoot. So could there have been some kind of confound, given that the two populations were coming from very different places? I can't point to any specific confound, but just anyone that you might have thought of and excluded.
Okay, what I understood from your question is if there are any confounding factors.
Yeah.
And of course, the familiarity to the barefoot condition plays a major role because most participants are not familiar with the barefoot condition. So it might be that the familiarity rather than the shoe might have influenced the finding. But I have not presented another study we've done. We had a habituation period for the barefoot condition in one of our studies. And we actually observed that the change in foot strike characteristics is still present, but the vertical ground reaction forces increases. So we are more confident to touch down with higher forces once we have completed a certain transition to a barefoot running or barefoot use. So yes, there are confounding factors. Also the lifestyle characteristics such as sports participation or BMI characteristics, but mostly we try to control for these factors in the studies, but as you know, you can never exclude any limitations in these studies.
Excellent, that's very helpful, thank you.
Okay, now we can come back to Hamburg. You have another question there? Please, go ahead.
Yeah. Yes.
Hello, thank you very much for your great talks. I have a question to Astrid Zech. I was always wondering when I meet somebody who can tell me this question, since, well, when you look around, everybody's wearing sneakers, almost everyone, and my parents anecdotally told me, oh, you need proper shoes, else you will suffer from posture problems, backache when you're old. Is there any reality in that? So when we compare larger cohorts of people who grew up wearing certain sorts of shoes or bare feet, do they suffer from backache or whatever? Is there any relationship?
They do. There are some studies in which high heels were compared with normal shoes, and women who have worn high heels in the 80s and 90s, they showed shortened Achilles tendon and some changes in the foot structures. And we recently completed a study with ballet dancers who are used to use dancing with point shoes, and we observed a greater amount of hallux angles, and about 20% of them were pathological. So we have submitted these findings to a journal. Right now, hopefully we can publish them, but we did this study in collaboration with great companies across Germany, so we can say, yes, the shoes and also dancing shoes can influence the foot morphology. Okay,
thank you. So that's relatively extreme. So high heels and this pointed ballet, normal sneakers and let's say flat shoes without what do you call the soft sole. Is it beneficial or is it bad?
Yeah.
Is there any evidence on?
There's nothing wrong with wearing sneakers, and as you can see, I don't wear minimalist shoes, so it's all fine to be comfortable with all kind of shoes, and you need to move fast sometimes, and the barefoot shoes might protect the feet against vertical load or greater vertical load. But we also have seen right now the marathon in London with a new world record. We have also the carbon shoes, and these are beneficial for faster times. But at the end, the shoes are destroyed. They are very expensive and very specific, but they might serve the goal at the end.
Thank you. I think we have we've got loads of questions. Let's take one at the back, Georgina. I think the yellow stripe shirt.
So I wanted to ask if, like, for the mental health study, if you included how sleep was involved, because if poor mental health affects sleep, maybe that affects your alertness on the pitch and that increases your likelihood of injury. And also recovery, maybe like if you get worse sleep, obviously that affects your recovery time. Like, was that factored in?
That's a fantastic question, and we were really hoping to find studies that looked at that, and actually we didn't, but we would expect that to be the case. I think one of the challenges is that poor sleep was a marker for the post-concussive syndrome, and most of the studies that we found were looking at head injury. So then there was a bit of a confound because that's in the measure rather than the mechanism. But I think we also really need some good longitudinal studies that measure things like impact on sleep, because you would absolutely expect that to be a factor. I know from the mental health research side that when studies have tried to identify which symptom across all of the psychological disorders is most commonly endorsed. So across every disorder, sleep is actually the most central. It's the most commonly endorsed symptom across everything. So I would anticipate this to be a factor, but we didn't find much research looking at that.
Okay, I'm going to take another question from Hamburg, if there is. Micah?
Yeah, we've got one more question.
I would also have a question regarding the mental health and injury study. Did you control for mediators or moderators like performance level or exposure? Because we also did a study with anxiety and injury rates and exposure, and we have observed in field hockey that athletes with the greater performance and therefore with greater exposure time, especially in the matches, have a greater score on the anxiety. Not above a certain level, but it was greater at the end, significantly greater. So did you see any association with the playing level or the exposure time?
Thank you. Unfortunately, because our studies were so mixed, we weren't able to look at moderators. We had hoped to, but in order to do that, you need consistent measurement across the studies included in the review, and there just wasn't. So we didn't have things like gameplay. I think it is because we were focused on sports injury, and many of these studies are, for example, from sports injury clinic, so they don't have the prospective data that we might want. And there was also surprisingly little about the context in which the injury occurred. Just simple things like how long the player had been on the pitch or how long they had been playing the game, whether it was a high-stakes game or a low-stakes game, for example, what part of the season it was. So was it, the start of the season, end of the season, all the kinds of things that we would want to know weren't routinely recorded, so we weren't able to look at that. So when we're talking about what research we hope can be done going forward, it would include measuring those kinds of things and making them available so that other researchers can study this.
Okay, I have quite a few questions. I'm going to take one more from Oxford and then we'll break, and there's plenty of time at the end for questions for all the talks. Can we have down here?
Me?
Yeah, wait for the microphone if you don't mind.
Yeah, first of all, thank you very much. Very interesting. I am involved in the NHS and in the hospitals. Whatever you said about mental health and recovering quicker or later, I'm not sure if you've been to the Oxford Children Hospital, because most of the children in there who have a sports injury, we find out that many who haven't got support with the family or not eating proper healthy food, and they are the ones who are in hospital for months and months. So thank you very much, and I hope if you would like, you would please come to our hospital and do a little research over there as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I would love to come and visit. I haven't, but it doesn't surprise me because I think we really are a system. Body and mind is one system, and in order to function well, particularly as a young person, but at any age, we need that social support. It's not just about individual factors, it is about our environment, and that includes the people who are dear to us and helping us, but that includes having access to good nutrition, good sleep, and the other factors that help in our overall well-being. It's not just about the individual. Thank you.
Well, having mentioned good nutrition, we have a bit of coffee, tea, and cake outside for your nutrition. And if you go out there and have that, we'll be back here at 6:30 promptly, please, and we'll get on with philosophy and more quick Q&A. And in Hamburg, we'll see you again at 6:30, okay? Thank you.
See you then.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. Great. Welcome back. Now, our final speaker this evening is Professor David Papineau, who's Professor of Philosophy at King's College in London. Professor Papineau is well known for his work in philosophy and his work in philosophy of mind, in particular in metaphysics. He's the author of several books and many, many articles, and one of his books is entitled Knowing the Score: What Sports Can Teach Us About Philosophy and What Philosophy Can Teach Us About Sports. tonight he's going to talk to us about, presumably, what philosophy can teach us about sport. David.
I'm just looking for a clock. That's fine. So I should go for 20 minutes.
20 minutes.
Okay, I'll try and stick to that so you can see what I can see and you can hear me. Good.
Yeah, make sure you speak into that microphone at all times.
Well, tell me when I don't.
Especially when you look to the screen.
I think I'll try and just keep looking here. Okay. So I'm going to talk about sporting skills in fast reaction sports, and I'm going to make some comments about how it works, and then I'm going to raise a puzzle, and then I'm going to solve the puzzle, and I think it will have some implications for action in general, not just action in sports, not just fast sporting skills. But let me start with fast sporting skills, and they are rather surprising. So I'm going to start with cricket. If I was in America, I'd have to switch the example to baseball, but I hope there's enough cricketers here. In cricket, the ball can come to you within half a second. The fastest bowlers bowl 100 miles an hour. Ball travels a chain, 22 yards, 66 feet. If you do the sums, that takes less than half a second, about 400 milliseconds. It's about as long as it takes you to blink. And that's not peculiar to cricket. Most fast reaction sports have very similar numbers. So in baseball, it's pretty much the same. The pitchers pitch 90 to 100 miles an hour from 60 feet away. Tennis, you're a bit further away, and you can move back, and you've got maybe 78 feet, but the ball from a fast server, that's Carlos Alcaraz, can come at 140 miles an hour. It's the same in squash and in table tennis, and it's very odd. I mean, there's a ball, and you're going to have to play a shot, and it depends on where the ball is going, and you have less than half a second to see where the ball is going, and it's very strange that these athletes can manage to tailor their shot to the trajectory of the ball. In fact, you'll see it's even stranger than I made it out so far. In fact, the trajectory of the ball is not necessarily the crucial thing. There's a lot of evidence showing that top athletes know a lot about where the ball is going before it's actually let go by their opponent or dispatched by their opponent. There are lots of interesting studies that they involve the athletes playing normally, batting at cricket or receiving at tennis, and they have special glasses on, and the experimenter presses a button as the opponent dispatches the ball, and at that point the athletes can't see anymore, and the evidence is that they're still pretty good at knowing roughly where the ball is. I mean, they can kind of get their tennis racket onto the ball. They're that good. I mean, they can't necessarily hit a good shot back, but they know a lot about where it's going to go. I mean, the picture is a famous illustration of that. That's Jenny Finch. She's the top softball pitcher in America. And softball, she doesn't pitch quite as fast. They spin around like that. And she pitches about 70 miles an hour, but from about 40 feet away. And so it's the same kind of distance. But the softball's about a third bigger than a normal baseball. And there was a famous occasion where she pitched at top male baseball players, Albert Pujols, Mike Piazza, and they couldn't touch the ball, even though it was just coming at them like a baseball and much bigger. And the explanation was they'd learned a lot about how to tell where the ball was coming when an overarm pitcher, you could see which way it was facing but they had no idea where the ball was coming with her because they hadn't developed the skill to anticipate from bodily posture. And I think that this skill at anticipating where the ball's going is why some of the very top athletes It's often remarked by the commentators that they seem to have a lot of time. They seem to have time to spare. David Gower, but Brian Lara, they didn't seem at all hurried when the ball was coming at them at 100 miles an hour. It's because they already knew where it was going to go. But I don't think that can be the whole story. Athletes do also need to react to where they see the ball to be going. It's most obvious in cricket, because in cricket the ball bounces on the pitch before it gets to you, and the bounce is somewhat unpredictable, and you have to tailor your shot to how high the ball bounces. And that's Sachin Tendulkar batting against. That was Brett Lee, I didn't tell you. And in fact, the bowler in this picture, out of the picture, is Brett Lee. And Sachin Tendulkar is uppercutting him. Anybody knows about cricket, the ball comes and you see it's bouncing back there, and you see how high it bounces, and you flip it as it's going past you, goes over the wicketkeeper's head, might well be a 6. And so he has to tailor his shot to how high he sees the ball to be bouncing when it's halfway down the pitch. So he's only got a fifth of a second, 200 milliseconds, to adjust the angle of his bat and his wrist. And it's very puzzling how that can be done. Quite a lot is known about how the cricketers do it, and other fast reaction athletes. One thing is, they don't keep their eye on the ball. There's a lot of research done the Australians are very good. There's the Australian Institute of Sports Science. They've done a lot of studies of this, and they've shown that batsmen, they'll watch the bowler bowl, let the ball go, or baseball batters, and the pitcher lets the ball go. And they watch the ball for a little bit, and then they saccade their eyes shoot off, in the case of cricket, to where they expect the ball. They've figured out where the ball's going to bounce. They shoot their eyes down there to catch it as it's coming up, to see how high it's going to bounce. So they look at the ball for 100 milliseconds, a tenth of a second, then they shift their eyes down to where it's going to bounce. It's a famous story that when the Australian Test cricket team was taken to a lecture by the Australian sports scientists, and they explained that the batsmen all stopped looking at the ball and started looking down at the ground. A distinguished Test batsman said, I don't believe a word of it. And you can understand, if you've ever played cricket, you can understand why. I mean, if you're taught to bat, you're taught, keep your eye on the ball. Keep your eye on the ball. And certainly, I mean, I know this, your experience when you're batting is that you see the ball moving continuously towards you. But, so it seems very odd that you stop watching the ball and start looking down at the ground. But those of you, I mean, who are familiar with vision science will know that this isn't. I mean, the cricketer shouldn't have been so surprised, because in truth, our eyes are zigging and zagging around all the time. Everybody's eyes jump around 2 or 3 times a second. I mean, if you're reading those words, unknown to you, your eyes are zigging and zagging around, looking at different parts of the page. And your brain very cleverly turns itself off as the eyes are zigging, and takes the information as when they've gone here or gone here, and builds up a picture of the scene in front of you, which feels to you entirely static and stable, even though your eyes are shooting around. And it's the same in cricket. The batsmen their eyes will be shooting around, the ball will be whizzing at them, and they will construct their brain, their visual cortex will construct a smooth picture of the ball moving continuously. But this isn't really helping us understand how the batsman managed to hit the ball, because there's quite a lot of debate about how long it takes the brain to construct this smooth, conscious picture of the ball moving continuously. But it's pretty generally agreed it's going to take about 400 milliseconds, if not more. So there's no question of your using the conscious awareness of where the ball is to guide your shot. The ball's gone by the time you're conscious of where it is. it's perfectly clear that what's going on is automatic conditioned reflex. The athletes have trained themselves to before they're conscious of where the ball is, to move their arms appropriately to get the bat to intersect with the ball. In fact, if you think about the sums, if you know much of this, it's pretty clear that when Sachin Tendulkar uppercuts the ball like that, after it's bounced there, and in a fifth of a second, it's going to be here and he's got to get it right, that the information from his eye to his arms is not going through his cortex. It'll go through his midbrain. It'll have to cut out the visual cortex. It would be too slow. So it's a very fast conditioned reflex. Okay, so now you should be finding this very puzzling, because these very fast conditioned reflexes are also under the athlete's conscious control. So that's a rather exotic shot for Sachin Tendulkar to play, when the ball comes past his head, to flip it like that, hope it goes over the wicketkeeper head into the crowd. And he would never play that shot at the beginning, probably never play it in a test match at all. It's a shot for a one-day match. He might play it in a test match if he's been in and got 100 runs, but he certainly wouldn't do it at the beginning of his innings. So it's a matter of conscious strategy for him to decide when this ball comes and bounces that high that he's going to play this exotic shot. It's something he would think about. He would think about, should I be playing that ball with that shot, or should I just let it go past my head? And he will adjust his strategy to the needs of the game. Now, it's not that he decides before he sees where the ball's going what shot he's going to play. I mean, sometimes athletes do that. I'm going to hit it to his backhand wherever he hits it to, or I'm going to go back and try and flip it over the bowler's head wherever the ball goes. But normally that's just fatal. You have to tailor your shot to where the ball's coming. You might decide, switching to tennis, that you're going to hit it to his backhand as often as you can, but whether you can depends on which ball is coming to you. If it's coming straight at you, you probably wouldn't be able to do it. So it's only when the right ball comes that you play this shot. But you're deciding whether you're going to play that shot when the right ball comes. And that's a bit puzzling because, as I said, this is almost an instantaneous reflex. So the puzzle is, how can these lightning-fast conditional reflexes also be under the conscious control of the batsman who's thinking about what's the best strategy? Okay. I think to answer this question, I want to think about the overall structure of action control in human beings. I was going to say human beings and other animals, but I'm interested in how it works in human beings. Part of the story is how it works in other animals, but it's the bit that works in human beings that's going to solve the puzzle. So I want to distinguish between conditioned reflexes. I've been talking about conditioned reflexes, and in a moment I'll talk about long-term intentions. And I think these are two different interrelated systems of action control in human beings. So think of conditioned reflexes as the products of systems of action control that we share with many other animals. There's different kinds of conditioning, different kinds of ways that you are encouraged to perform a certain action in certain circumstances because in the past that action has been rewarding. Very simplest system is stimulus response conditioning, where you just perform an action if it's been rewarding. There are more complex structures of that kind, sometimes called model-based learning or response outcome conditioning, where you learn also that on the way to the ultimate goal, you've produced some intermediate goal, and you'll perform the action that does that only if the intermediate goal is still valuable to you. And these are, in fact, remarkably flexible and productive systems of action control. They can generate, by combining different elements of conditioning, novel actions and novel circumstances. I think when you see a football player running fast at a defender and it does some completely novel trick, it's because they've combined various elements of their rather sophisticated conditioned learning. But on its own, behavior driven by conditioned learning is kind of limited. I mean, it will depend what action you perform on which of your desires are currently activated. Your sense of which actions are good for which ends will depend largely on your past experience, what's resulted from those actions in the past. Doesn't allow you to construct a sequence of actions that you might perform over a number of days that are all needed to produce some result, because these systems will always be acting in the here and now. They'll produce the action that, given your experience, is best now. And humans, I suspect largely because they have language, have the ability to do much, much better. They can deliberate about which actions at some future time are going to be the best things to do. We often discuss with each other, what's our best plan, what should we do over the summer, how should we stop our child misbehaving. We have these complex projects and we figure out, well, we need to do these things in sequence. And so we aren't just driven by our currently active desires. We can make use of all the information that we have from reading, culture, accumulated human wisdom. And this allows us to coordinate our actions over time and with each other. So humans have a system of forming intentions that are much more sophisticated than just conditioned behavior. You might wonder what's the relation between these two systems of action control. You might think, well, here's the simple animal-like conditioning, and here's the deliberation, and this produces one set of actions, this produces another set of actions. But I don't think it works like that. That's not how evolution works. I mean, if our behavior historically, before we had culture and deliberation, was driven by the conditioned system, then what the deliberation and intention formation will do is find a way of controlling that older system. You might think of it as telling it, right now, the important thing to do now is to apply to that school for our child because that's what they need. And then you go ahead and do the things that are needed to produce that result. So that the deliberation system decides what needs to be done and then hands over the instruction to the older system. Let me take a simple example. You might listen to the weather forecast and think you've got to go and see your friend a few blocks away, and then you'll think, well, okay, when I leave the house, I better take a hat. And so your deliberation has formed that intention, but then it hands it over to the older system. The older system knows how to pick up a hat when it sees one. It doesn't have to think about how to do that. Now, yeah. So we've got these two. Now, it mightn't be clear how bringing in the complex, sophisticated deliberation intention formation system. I should have said, these are the people who worked on the importance for philosophy of intention formation. That's Michael Bratman at Stanford who started doing this 50 years ago, Richard Holton at Cambridge, who is very interesting about the importance of intention formation for humans. You might be wondering how this is going to I'm going back, so I'm pushing the wrong buttons. How it's going to help with my puzzle. So it's all very well thinking, all right, what shot shall I play, and then deliberating about that. And now, but if the shot also has to respond to the oncoming ball, how can you know beforehand which shot is the good one to play? That would be like premeditating your shot, deciding you're going to play the shot whatever the ball is, and that's not a good idea. So how does bringing in these two systems help explain how the fast reaction sportsmen do so well? And I think the thing to recognize is that the automatic conditioned dispositions that the athletes can have can involve very complex multi-part skills. So think of a cricketer. A cricketer will spend many, many hours in the nets, in junior matches, honing their skills. And what they will do is they will spend many hours in the practice nets playing defensively. Right, I'm now playing defensively. They'll practice playing defensively. And playing defensively will involve the disposition if they get this ball to play that shot, and if they get a different ball to play another shot. So they will have, among their basic skills, playing defensively, or alternatively, playing attackingly, which is what Tendulkar was doing in the picture I showed you. And these complex skills are, in effect, multi-track dispositions, do different things to different balls. And they've managed to automate all that. So what they have to do when they're deliberating is this now the time to switch from being defensive to being attacking? And once they've decided that, then they, as it were, switch the program. I'm now on autopilot playing defensively, or I've stopped doing that, I'm now switching the program to play attackingly. That playing attackingly will involve doing different things to different balls, but they don't have to think about that, which is just as well, because of course they can't, there's no time. So that's the solution. That's how Tendulkar can both tailor his shot to the bounce of the ball, but also tailor his shot to the needs of the situation. He's going to do two things. Before the ball comes, he's going to think about what kind of disposition, what kind of batting should I be doing. Once he's set that, then automatically he will choose the shot that's appropriate to the ball. You want me to stop?
2 minutes.
Okay, 2 minutes. I've got two more things I'll say very quickly. One is, I don't think this applies just in the sporting situation. I think this is a general model for human action control. I think there are these two things we do. One is we step back, we take time, we deliberate, we set ourselves a project. That's one kind of thing we do. And then after that, after we've set ourselves a project, we don't have to think about it anymore. I mean, I can drive to London without thinking about what I'm doing at all, because I've decided that project, this is a skill that I've acquired. And in fact, I'm not very good at driving to London from Oxford, but I can drive from London to Cambridge without thinking about it at all. So a lot of the time, our behavior is just on automatic pilot. We deliberate, and then we hand over the instructions to the older systems. So that's a general model about action control. And final point is, it tells us something about the kind of mental requirements on top athletes. Now, I'm very interested in the extent to which athletes have to focus on what they're doing. They have to really be in the bubble. They have to have nothing else distracting them from what they're doing. You might think, given what I've said, why is that the case? Because, as I said, first of all, they deliberate, and then they hand it over to the automatic system. But the automatic system mightn't listen to your instruction. There's a question about the the intention formation system controls the automatic system. I haven't really said how. And while you might set an intention, give it to the automatic system mightn't necessarily do it. I mean, I've thought about the weather. I think I better take my hat when I leave the house, and then I leave the house and I forget to take the hat, because while I formed the intention and I told my motor system, the motor system has kind of forgotten. Now, it's not quite clear exactly how the intention formation system controls the motor system, but one way in which you can be sure it's going to control it is to keep your intention in mind all the time. If I keep saying to myself, take your hat, take your hat, take your hat, then I'll take the hat. And that's what sportsmen have to do, sportswomen. They have to say, bat defensively, bat defensively. I mean, and if you've ever played cricket, you do that. You tell yourself all the time what it is you're supposed to be doing, precisely because if you start daydreaming, then you might forget to take your hat. You might play the wrong shot. So that's why athletes have to focus. And choking is when the pressure of the situation stops you focusing. That's Jacqueline de Veltner, most famous case of choking. She was about to beat Steffi Graf at Wimbledon. She was about to go 5-1 up. And I think she started thinking about how nice it would be to win Wimbledon, and stopped thinking about hit the ball to her backhand. And she lost, and she was very upset. But nice to have a happy ending to the talk. 5 years later, she managed to win Wimbledon, to her eternal credit. Thank you. That's a book which has lots more of this in.
Thank you so much. That's really interesting. Right, so now we have 3 talks, and we can take questions for any of them. This time I'll start in Oxford and then come to Hamburg, Micah. So we've got one question here, and Georgina will give you the microphone in a minute, Jack. Georgina, are you going to, yeah, and also fix it so that we can see the screen? Yeah? Okay, good. So we try and get them up on the big screen so that we don't just hear voices.
So this one's for David. So I'm just, if very fast athletic action is sort of based on acquired dispositions, how do people initially acquire and train those dispositions? If sort of to acquire and train those dispositions, you'd seem to have some sort of conscious thought in that very quick time frame. And then sort of a follow on from that is, how do people end up being more or less able to perform these dispositions? Sort of what differentiates Joe Root from whatever, a sort of baseline county cricket player when it comes to reflex action?
We all learn dispositions of this kind. We all learn skills that don't automatically require some training and practice. I mean, think about how you learn to tie your shoelaces. I mean, there was a time when you didn't know how to tie your shoelaces, and somebody said, well, you make a loop and put the other one on top, and then and you kind of followed the instructions, and you did it a lot of times. And what happens, and maybe there's some neuroscientists here who can fill in the details, but what happens is the sequence becomes automated. It ceases to be under the control of your prefrontal cortex. It's just a loop inside the motor system, and now you don't have to think about how to tie your shoelaces. You just have to think, now I should tie my shoelaces, and you know how to do it without doing anything else. It's a basic action for you. So everybody, and you learn how to drive. I mean, I can remember how difficult it was to remember to put the clutch and the brake and so on. Now I don't think about it. So everybody learns automatic routines like this. Some people are better than others. Joe Root clearly is very, very good at it. And of course, I mean, in these athletically demanding skills, no doubt there's some native difference between the people who get to be very good at it and the people who struggle a bit. Does that answer the question?
Okay. Micah, do we have one from Hamburg? A question?
No questions at the moment, thank you.
Okay, we do have some here in Oxford. Can we go to this lady here?
Hello. It actually follows on a little bit from the one that you've just had. So I work on a project called Football on the Brain, and with a different hat on, I'm a mindfulness teacher. And we are always asked by clubs, how do we improve the decision-making ability of our players? How do we turn them into exceptional players with good game intelligence? And I'm interested in this sort of this line between that sort of intentional versus the automated responses and conditioned learning. And I just wonder if you could just comment on your thoughts on whether something like mindfulness or awareness training could improve in the moment, where that line exists between intention versus the sort of pre-learned automated responses, or whether, and this was what the response was from the footballing community when I proposed it, that would just complicate things and we would end up with overthinking and players would just stop working. So just your thoughts on that, please.
I don't know the answer to your question, but that's because I don't know enough about football, I think. So in that book, I say, look, at any time, after you've done your training, there will be the things that you know how to do without thinking about how to do them. You don't, in terms of your conscious understanding, do them by doing something else. They're the kind of bottom level things. And what you don't want to think about as an athlete is how you do those things. Then you get the yips. You start thinking about, you overthinking your movements. That's a disaster. But you do want to think about what it is you're doing. Are you playing defensively? Are you playing attackingly? And I think it's very important for the coaches and the athletes to be able to distinguish between those two things. They don't want to start thinking about the mechanics of their skills, but they do want to think about which tactics they're exercising at the moment. Now, I don't know about football. I mean, clearly they don't want to think about how they can trap the ball and make it drop at their feet. Completely amazing skill, and but they've all been able to do that since they were 12. But yeah, I'm a Tottenham fan, and the poor players have been changing their tactics. They've changed it 3 times this season, and the manager has to get them. Now, are you pressing? What kind of pressing are you doing? You'd like that to be automatic, but in the case of Tottenham, it can't be automatic. They've got to be concentrating. I don't know. You tell me.
I don't have an answer.
I think it will vary from sport to sport, from player to player, from tactical setup to tactical setup. But the line should be there. I mean, the things you want the players to think about and the things you don't want them to think about, that's a very important line. And I
guess having that awareness of what they are thinking about.
Yeah.
But that requires action, right? That almost like you're driving, shifting. We've all done it, driving along the road, and we don't realise we've gone onto autopilot, and we suddenly go, oh, hang on, where am I? Bringing that awareness back. And it's whether that is helpful in a high-pressured, fast sport, or whether that's unhelpful.
It's clear that a lot of things have to be on autopilot. You can't make them start thinking about everything that, I mean, on the practice ground, given a month or two, it might be worth thinking about, but they can't be thinking about that during a game.
Okay, we're going to go on to another question here. I think this gentleman here has had a question.
Just listening to you and listening to anyone speak, I wonder, is there a parallel between actually speech and this fast reaction sporting thing? Because I don't know how the end of the sentence is going to end. Do you know what I mean? But I've kind of got a long-term intention to sound vaguely intelligent in this, in these circumstances. And some people are quicker at responding or quick-witted. They have that kind of perhaps initial disposition to being quick thinking. Is there any parallel between that fast reaction sport and people who are quick-witted, who can speak and come to an end, full stop?
It's very funny that I haven't thought about this since I was working on that book and talking about it and writing about it, and that was nearly 10 years ago. And I remember thinking about this issue and thinking, isn't it odd that just talking is, in a sense, an unthinking skill? I don't think about how to do it, I just do it. And but at the same time, talking is the exercise of the highest level of conceptual ability, and that seemed a bit paradoxical. But that was before large language models, and before I, and I guess many of us, had any idea that a next word prediction disposition could generate such amazing results. And so, yeah, I mean, I think large language models, I don't know how far we think they approach what humans do when they're talking, but I myself think it's a very, very close analogy. And what I'm doing is I've just got this amazingly complex set of condition reflexes to produce an appropriate next word, and out it all comes. And yeah, okay, I mean, there's something a bit, I mean, one thing that's weak about large language models, if you burble away without thinking about where you're trying to get to, it doesn't work quite as well as trying to construct on the hoof where you're going, and that's a bit not just letting the skill flow. There's something extra there. But,
okay,
yeah.
I'll go back to Hamburg again. Micah, any questions?
Yeah, we have a question. Yes, we have a question.
I have a question on the study of injuries and mental health. And the question is, when assessing the association between injuries and then the mental health afterwards, did you also look at the time frame that was between the injury and the mental health assessment across the studies?
Thank you. We tried to do that. In the majority, there weren't enough studies, basically. Many of them were actually clinical studies where someone was already injured. So then we only had a report of when the injury occurred, and that wasn't always recorded. So we wanted to, because that's really important, but we didn't have enough studies to be able to meta-analyze that, which is partly why we're suggesting better longitudinal measures, prospective measures before the injury occurs, so that you can actually look at direction of effects and things like time from injury to recovery and so on. But it's a really great question.
Okay, we have a question here.
Thank you, and thank you to all the speakers, because it's been super amazing. My question is for David, which before I came here, I did 3 years of full-time training in circus, and whilst I understand that this like explanation for tennis or cricket, that you kind of switch tack because you're either doing attack or defend and you make these very fast decisions, in like flying trapeze or knife throwing, you're making very fast decisions and you have like a million more possibilities than attack or defend. And if you think about like flying trapeze, when you are deciding how to release, you've got the catcher and the human and the physics of the swinging thing, and so much you need to know how you're going to rotate your body. And I think the idea that you know a mode of, like, I just don't understand how the attack-defend model would expand to other sports where you make these really rapid decisions and yet you don't have a clear, like, if X, then Y kind of protocol, you know?
Right, I would have thought that flying trapeze, there's no decision about what routine you're going to do. You're doing, I don't know, triple somersault and catch. That's what you're doing. I mean, within that, there's all kinds of adjustments that need to be made. But I take it you really don't want to be thinking about making those adjustments. I mean, you want to be thinking about something like, I'm going to catch their hands. I'm going to do the triple somersault. But you don't think about, I mean, isn't that what happened to the American gymnast, Simone Wiles? And she got, in effect, the yips. She started thinking about where she was in the air, and it's completely fatal. So my favorite example is a baseball player who was the catcher for the New York Mets. And his career was destroyed because he couldn't flip the ball back to the catcher, to the pitcher. I mean, you're the catcher that comes in, then you flip it back to the pitcher. And he lost the ability to lob a ball 20 feet. Because if you think about it, It's a very complicated ability. You have to, the speed of your arm and the speed of your wrist and the angle that you let it go, and a lot of us learn how to adjust all those in real time, compensating for each other so the ball lands just with you. But once you start thinking about it, you're completely gone. So, I take it the flying trapeze is completely a case of just automated routine, and you just want to think, I'm doing this trick, and I'm going to catch the bar at the end, and don't think about anything else.
Okay, I'll ask again in Hamburg.
No further questions.
No, okay. Well, we have another one here in Oxford, up here.
Thank you, and this one is for David. So, would you say that the difference between someone who is more or less skilled at something partly consists in the richness of the dispositions that are part of any given mode of playing, and maybe the ability to, well, for the antecedents of those sort of if-then responses to be more and more fine-grained?
First question,
yeah,
he referred to Joe Wolf, who's a transcendent batsman, and they just have got a lot more fine detail in their dispositions that they can adjust to where the ball's going. They don't think about it. I mean, in the case of the batsman, maybe the trapeze, there's no time, there's literally no time to think about it. It's just all a tenth of a second, and your body is doing it. I mean, your top of your spinal cord is doing it. Your brain isn't doing it at all. And people train and train and train. I mean, it's amazing how good people can get at this kind of thing. Just think about people who can type 100 words a minute. I mean, completely freaky skill. They aren't thinking about it. It's just, I mean, we must go through their visual cortex, but still. Yeah, that's what skills are, these very, very fine-tuned conditioned reflexes.
I think we have another question in the back.
I mean, I guess it's a bit similar to the other ones, but I wanted to ask maybe with like, if you listen to like, I don't know, like jazz, and like you've got those piano players who like go incredibly quickly, and I guess it's slightly different because there's no like end goal. I don't really know what they're going to play next, and it's like really quick. Is that like a similar way? Like, do they use a similar thing?
So, sorry, the question's about, like, I didn't quite hear, improvised music, jazz musicians. So I have a friend who's a fairly eminent jazz musician. He's very interested in this stuff, and he says, yes, it is. He's exercising a skill, and he says it takes a lot of concentration to let the skill flow and be used effectively. And it's very interesting what he said to me about what he did when he was practicing. So when he was, because I mean, musicians have to practice, you know, he's a pianist, he practices some hours a day, and he said when he practices, he can't get into full performance mode. It's too demanding, it's too tiring. But at the same time, what he mustn't think about is what his fingers are doing. That's terrible. So when he's practicing, he thinks about something else. But when he's performing, then he needs to be focused, just like the athlete, focused on the music, what he's trying to do with the music, but not thinking about the components of his skill at all.
Actually, can I come in on this? I was just thinking about the woman who asked about mindfulness, and she's gone now. I was just thinking about, I'm not sure what this is what she would call mindfulness, but my cards on the table, I do a lot of yoga. And one of the things in yoga is you're supposed to get into a condition where you are aware of what you're doing, but you're not controlling what you're doing. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people will sometimes, if you go very slowly, especially when you do the final pose of what's called sleep shavasana, you're not actually supposed to go to sleep. You're supposed to be in a mindful state, and your body is primed, but you're not thinking. So I wonder if there is a state between this fully conscious and automatic that can be explored?
I don't know enough about yoga, though I am thinking of signing up to Pilates pretty soon, because I need to unstiffen a bit. But surely you have to be thinking about the position you're holding as opposed to some other position, or just lying on a bed. I mean, you're doing something. It's
that's why it's mindful.
Yeah,
it fills your mind, but it's not. You're not actively thinking.
So the thing about focus, I said, that you have to focus on your intention to make sure you keep executing that intention. Maybe that's too strong. Maybe what you have to be doing is not let something else distract the intention that you formed.
Yeah.
And maybe thinking about nothing is good enough. I mean, you've got to stop something else interfering with your action control system. You don't necessarily have to be positively directing it. That might be right.
Yeah, interesting.
I was wondering how this might relate to people who are carrying out a task which is much of the time very routine, but where there are serious dangers in not noticing a sudden change. So you mentioned driving, and even more perhaps train drivers or airplane pilots, that they may be much of the time following an automatic routine, and yet they have to, for their own sake and that of often many passengers, be very quick to notice and respond when something untoward suddenly starts to occur.
No, I think that's right. So there's some skills like driving on autopilot, which are good enough, and you can. I can remember I was driving from London to Cambridge. I got to Ware, and policeman stopped me. He said, "Do you know where you are?" And the fact that it was Ware that's a distracting joke. I said, no, in fact, I'd been thinking about Gödel's theorem, and I'd driven 40 miles thinking about. But the policeman stopped me. I wasn't driving that well. But by and large, in certain contexts, it's good enough not to be focused. But if I was a Formula One driver, I couldn't be thinking. I mean, I really got to be thinking because there the precision is important. And it may well be that there's some skills in some contexts where you've got to switch from the low-grade control where a few mistakes don't matter to really making sure you don't make any mistakes. Yeah.
Okay, I think we have gone a little bit over the time, so I'm going to have to stop us there. But thank you very much to all the speakers. Thank you in Hamburg. It was lovely to get your questions, and I look forward to seeing at least some of you next year when we do consciousness, animal, self, and human consciousness. And thank all the speakers again.
Thank you. Thank you from Hamburg.
Good night, Hamburg.